Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Ben Francis, and tonight we're being joined by a member of the Young Scots for Independence, the youth group of the SNP, Olaf Stando. Hey Olaf, how you doing?
Hi Ben, good to see you. Good to be aboard. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, it should be pretty interesting. Got a lot of Scottish politics stories tonight, so yeah, should be good for you.
Just doesn't stop, does it?
No, it doesn't stop. So first we'll move on to the Ukraine update on day 806 of the conflict. The EU has reached a deal to arm Ukraine using seized profits from Russia's frozen assets. EU senior diplomats meeting on Wednesday agreed on the €4.4 billion windfall profits, smoothing over a dispute about taxation and management costs in Belgium, where most of the frozen assets are held. A Ukrainian drone attack started a fire and damaged an oil refinery in Russia's Krasnodar region, the area's crisis administration said today. Several oil tankers were damaged at the refinery near the village of Yurkovka, the administrator said. Ukraine's air defenses destroyed 17 out of the 20 attack drones that Russia launched targeting the Odessa region into Thursday morning, the Ukrainian Air Forces said. An undeclared Russian military intelligence officer named Colonel Maxim Elovic will be expelled from the UK. James Cleverly, the UK Home Secretary, also announced the closure of several Russian diplomatic premises in retaliation for, quote, malign activity across the UK and Europe. The measures come after a suspected arson attack on a Ukrainian-linked business in East London, which authorities suspect was organized by the Kremlin, and over which charges have been laid. Russia has denied involvement. In a separate case, 6 Bulgarian nationals have been charged with conspiring to commit espionage on behalf of the Russian government in the United Kingdom. Russian missiles and drones struck nearly a dozen Ukrainian energy infrastructure facilities on Wednesday, causing serious damage at three thermal power plants and blackouts in multiple Ukrainian regions, officials have said. Ukraine's Air Force said it shot down 39 out of the 55 missiles and 20 out of the 21 drones. National power grid operator Ukrenergo said it was forced to introduce electricity cuts in 9 regions and expanded them nationwide for businesses during the peak evening hours of Wednesday. Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal estimated that more than 800 heating facilities had been damaged and up to 8 gigawatts of power generation lost so far, adding the government needed €1 billion to fund repair work, $1 billion to fund repair work. Volodymyr Zelensky noted that the attacks were launched on the day which marked the end of the Second World War. Ukraine said it was producing the same number of deep strike drones as Russia, claiming to have reached parity on a key type of weapon with Russia. Russia's defense ministry has claimed that Russian forces have taken over the village of Kizlyvka in Ukraine's Kharkiv region and the village of Novokalinovo in the Donetsk region. Ukraine's parliament has passed a bill allowing mobilization of some categories of convicts, but not those convicted of premeditated murder, rape, sexual violence, and crimes against national security. Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz stressed Berlin's support for a Ukrainian peace summit to be held in Switzerland in mid-June during a phone call with Volodymyr Zelensky. So, Olaf, do you think that the weapons being sent to Ukraine, especially the new ones that have been approved by the EU, will be enough to slow Russia's gradual advance in the Donbass?
Well, I better hope so. I mean, look, it's very clear that Russia's ambitions to destroy Ukraine and therefore destroy the last remaining bastion of democracy and freedom, it's not stopping. It's very, very clear. I mean, we've seen today Russia and Belarus carrying out these joint tactical nuclear weapons drills. And obviously, we've had the military parade as well in Moscow, really showing off the big military might. And it's clear that Putin is feeling very confident, cock a hoop, in fact, about his chances. So it's all the more important to support Ukraine militarily. It's all the more important to continue sending aid to Ukraine. I know that a lot of the focus shifts towards what's happening in Gaza, the terrible atrocities there, and of course It's harrowing watching those scenes, and I'm sure we're going to move on to that in a second. But it is so important to keep Ukraine at the forefront of our minds. And you know what? Again, big credit to Broadcasting Scotland for keeping up the Ukraine updates on a daily basis. I think a lot of the media just don't report this stuff anymore. So credit to you. And let's hope the weapons work in holding back Putin's terrible, terrible ambitions.
Yeah, and just quickly, before we do move on to Palestine, do you think that there is any hope of a peace deal, given what we've heard about the Swiss peace deal? Like, do you think it's viable, or do you think it'll just go nowhere?
Well, I think any peace deal which gives up Ukrainian territory to Russia, including Crimea, should not be tolerated, frankly, because it means that Ukraine is giving up territory, which was its sovereign territory of an independent nation state, to an invader. And I think that sets a really dangerous precedent. So I think any peace deal must be measured. It must take into account the fact that Putin is a war criminal, literally wanted by the ICC. And at the same time, we have to know and we have to understand that if Trump were to come to power in November, there'll be this push to end the war in 24 hours and cede a lot more Ukrainian territory than might be proposed right now. So I think it's really, really important to firstly keep aiding Ukraine militarily, keep supporting Ukraine on the front line, keep the light on for Ukraine for EU membership as well, but at the same time, not cede any ground to Putin.
Okay, looking at the time, we'll have to move on to the Israel-Gaza latest. At least 34,904 Palestinians have been killed and 78,514 injured in Gaza since 7th of October, Gaza's health ministry said in a statement today. Turkish Trade Minister Omar Bolat said today that Israeli claims of Ankara easing its trade ban with Israel are, quote, obviously fictional and have nothing to do with reality. Turkey's trade ban with Israel will remain in place until a permanent ceasefire in Gaza and humanitarian aid flow to the region is secured, the minister said in a post on X. Two top Israeli officials have criticized President Biden today for threatening to stop certain arms supplies to Israel if it lifts its invasion of Rafah. Quote, this is a difficult and very disappointing statement to hear from a president to whom we have been grateful since the beginning of the war, Israel's ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, said on public radio. Israel's far-right finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, said his government would pursue its goals in Gaza despite the US threat. Israel's former head of defense production and procurement today rejected the claim that the country could manage without US arms, saying Israel would be forced to source arms elsewhere. Slovenia's government today passed a decree on recognizing a Palestinian state that will be sent to Parliament for approval by mid-June. Ireland, Spain, and other EU countries could recognize Palestine as an independent state as soon as the 21st of May. According to reports on RTE, the reports come as EU leaders come under growing pressure to respond to Israel's operation in Rafah. At least 67 MEPs have signed a letter urging EU leaders to convene, quote, an urgent meeting to discuss the EU response to the events in Rafah, end quote. Agency France Presse, AFP, journalists reported heavy shelling in Rafah earlier today. Israel's assault around Rafah on the southern edge of the Gaza Strip is finally bringing what was left of Gaza's medical system to its knees, doctors told Reuters. Rafah's main Al-Najjar hospital abruptly shut as fighting came close, while the Emirati maternity hospital, where 85 babies a day were being born, stopped receiving patients. The two checkpoints into southern Gaza have also been shut, blocking the arrival of basic supplies such as fuel, though Israel says it reopened its Karim Shalom crossing on Wednesday and is trying to get aid through. The World Health Organization, or WHO, said it has only 3 days of fuel for its medical operations in southern Gaza. Speaking about the closure of the Rafah crossing from Egypt on Wednesday, WHO's director, Tedros Adhanom, said, quote, fuel that we expect to be allowed in today has not been allowed in, meaning that we only have enough fuel to run health services in the south for 3 more days. Cypriot officials confirmed that a vessel carrying aid to a pier built by the US off Gaza set sail from Cyprus today. The US flagged Sagamore left the port of Larnaca in the morning, and US officials have said that the vessel will be used to offload supplies onto a floating pier. Israeli protesters blocked aid trucks headed from Jordan to Gaza, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported. And the UK's Foreign Secretary David Cameron has said that the UK would not support a major Israeli assault on Rafah without a clear plan for protecting civilians. So, Olaf, just in regard to David Cameron's comments, do you think it's like at all coherent for the Foreign Secretary to say he opposes an invasion into Rafah while also saying that he will continue to give Israel weapons during this invasion into Rafah?
Well, that's exactly the really strange dichotomy, isn't it? On one hand, you've got the UK government saying increasingly positive things. I mean, you have to recognise that they've moved a long way since opposing a ceasefire to now calling for an end to the Rafah invasion. But you can't say that at the same time as selling weapons manufactured here in Scotland, by the way, and manufactured across the UK that are used for killing tens of thousands of innocent women and children. I mean, just today, you've had 80,000 people leaving the Rafah area, which is the last area that people were told to evacuate. Of course, people were displaced several times now. First, Israel told them to move from the north to the center. Then they had to move from the center to Khan Yunis, and from Khan Yunis to Rafah. And, you know, some of the people that are returning now to the humanitarian zone of Al-Mawasi and Khan Yunis are returning to watch their homes turn to rubble. I mean, there is literally hardly any space where people can shelter. There's only a handful of hospitals that are operating at a very limited capacity. And, you know, it is a humanitarian disaster waiting to unfold. It is, there's a plausible case for genocide happening right now. And I just think the complicity of the British government and of a lot of the European governments as well in sending weapons is quite shameful, frankly. Now, we've seen governments like the Irish government, the Spanish government, taking a lead on this, calling for a ceasefire very early on and calling for embargoes and sanctions given Israel's war crimes. We've seen even Joe Biden, who's been obviously the staunchest ally of Israel, stopping arms sales in light of the Rafah invasion. And it's also so important to recognize this, right? The only reason why Netanyahu is doing this, or perhaps the main reason why Netanyahu is doing this, is because he's fighting for his political survival. We know that polling within Israel shows that the majority of people prioritize getting the hostages out instead of eradicating Hamas and the invasion on Rafah. There's protests in Israel, in every single city and town, protesting Netanyahu's hardline approach to this. But the hard right, far right, extremist settler ministers in his government, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, are basically holding Netanyahu hostage. They're basically saying to Netanyahu that if he doesn't launch this full-scale invasion on Rafah, and if he doesn't annihilate innocent civilians in Palestine, Netanyahu's government might collapse. So it is extremely cynical. It's extremely worrying. I think it's imperative to halt the arms sales until there's a permanent ceasefire agreed. And of course, it's good to see negotiations continue in Cairo, but the two sides simply have to put this to an end.
So now moving on to our main story of the night, Parliament approved new cabinet appointments. The Scottish Parliament voted to approve the new Scottish cabinet team today, following John Swinney's full cabinet and ministerial team yesterday. Consisting of the 11 cabinet secretaries, including the First Minister, the Scottish cabinet will be supported by 14 ministers. This reduces the size of the Scottish government by 4 since the start of the year. Ivan McKee has returned to government as Ivan McKee has returned to government as Minister for Public Finance. Minister for Parliamentary Business, George Adam. Minister for Equalities, Migration and Refugees, Emma Roderick, and Minister for Local Government, Empowerment and Planning, Joe Fitzpatrick, have stepped down from their previous roles. The Scottish Greens voted against Kate Forbes as Deputy First Minister.
4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to start by thanking George Adam, Joe Fitzpatrick and Emma Roddick for their contribution to government. It was a privilege to work with them through the Butte House Agreement, and they're all champions of a fairer, more equal Scotland. Presiding Officer, the Act which established this Parliament gives the First Minister the responsibility of nominating those he wishes to serve as Scottish ministers. It gives Parliament the responsibility to decide on the suitability of those candidates. John Swinney knows the esteem that I hold him in, but today he is asking me and other members of this Parliament who are LGBT to appoint to the second highest office in this country an individual who believes it was wrong that Parliament granted us the same legal rights as everyone else 10 years ago. I cannot, the Scottish Greens cannot, support the appointment of someone who fundamentally does not believe that everyone in Scotland is equal, worthy of equal rights and respect under the law. We cannot support the appointment of someone who believes not only that equal marriage is wrong, but also children being born outside of marriage. So we will oppose the appointment of Kate Forbes for Deputy First Minister. I'm a man of deep Christian faith, but I do not hold the same views as Kate has set out. That statement certainly applies to me, but it wasn't me who said it. It was John Swinney. Last year, the now First Minister said that Kate Forbes was entitled to her views, but that others are entitled to decide if someone who holds those views would be an appropriate individual to be First Minister. As Mr Swinney said then, this is not about whether a person holds to a particular faith. My belief in the good news brought by Jesus Christ is something I share with Mr Swinney and Ms Forbes, and in that we share something far more important than party affiliation or political ideology. Faith is not the issue here. The issue is that I'm being asked to vote for someone who thinks there's something wrong with me. Not because of any views I hold, but simply because of who I am. I will not do that, and the Scottish Greens will not do that. Yesterday, Kate Forbes was given the opportunity to reassure LGBT people in a question asked by ITV News. She did not. The First Minister had to step in just to say the word LGBT. This month we celebrate 25 years of this Parliament. There's much to celebrate, especially in all the ways in which Scotland has become a more equal place as a result of devolution. But in the last few years, it feels for the first time like we are going backwards. Scotland is in many ways a harder place to be LGBT today than it was 5 years ago. My lapel pin was given to me by the Time for Inclusive Education campaign. Their work delivered LGBTQ inclusive education in our schools, and it's a sad reflection of where Scottish politics is now that if the TIE campaign were launched today rather than a decade ago, I do not think it would succeed. The existence of LGBTQ people, especially queer young people, has been called into question in a way many of us hoped was consigned to history. First Minister, many LGBTQ Scots are afraid today. I know that's not your intention, and it's certainly not the intention of Kate Forbes, but it is the reality. It was the reality before Kate Forbes' nomination for Deputy First Minister. But the First Minister must acknowledge that this nomination has heightened that fear. And if he doesn't wish to hear it from me, he could listen to the many LGBTQ members of the Scottish National Party who expressed their fear and alarm yesterday. Before I close, Presiding Officer, I want to address those who have highlighted that the Scottish Greens have worked with Kate Forbes previously. That's true. There are issues that we progressed together that I'm proud of, like the agreement to begin trials of a 4-day working week in the public sector. That was all before the SNP leadership election last year, in which these deeply hurtful positions were made known. It would have been wrong to presume Kate Forbes' views simply because the church she is a member of. Ian Blackford is a fine example of a Free Church member and an elected representative who played a key role in advancing equal marriage rights across these islands. He also supported John Swinney last year when he questioned Ms Forbes' suitability for high office. There is not a credible argument for someone being an unsuitable First Minister, but a perfectly suitable deputy. I know that John Swinney considers me and all LGBT members of this Parliament to be equal. I know that he shares in the joy felt by every LGBT person in Scotland who has used the marriage right that this Parliament gave them, including members of this Parliament. But today the First Minister is asking us to appoint as his deputy someone who does not share in that joy, who does not think we are deserving of equality under the law, who thinks there's something wrong with us. I cannot, the Scottish Greens cannot do that, but I want to hear him tell me why I should.
Can I come to the contribution from Ross Greer? And Ross Greer set out, and understandably, a deeply personal perspective, a personal perspective for him, but also a perspective that is shared by his colleagues. And I understand that. And I think Ross Greer and his colleagues in the Green Party know that I respect the issues and considerations and perspectives that they have. What I was trying to say to Patrick Harvie in my question, in my response to his question at First Minister's questions some time ago, is that the country I want to lead, or the country I lead actually today, is a modern, diverse, dynamic society. I recognise that. My whole government recognises that. All of its members recognise that. And we want to keep it that way. That's what we are committed to doing. We want to make sure that those values of diversity that have been at the heart of the journey of this Parliament over so many years are protected and enhanced as we move forward as a country together. Because when I say to the country, as I did on Tuesday, standing here, that I offer myself as the First Minister for everybody in Scotland, I cannot convey adequately or strongly enough that I mean absolutely everybody. I want every single person in our society to feel they are at home and at peace in our society. And I come to these conclusions actually from some of the motivations that Mr Greer has talked about as well. I come to them from a very deep Christian faith. I believe that nothing can separate us from the love of God. That is the foundation of who I am. Nothing can separate us from the love of God, and we are equal in the eyes of God, every one of us. And I hope those comments, which are more forthright comments about faith than I have ever uttered in my 45 years in politics, will perhaps illustrate to Parliament the magnitude of the seriousness with which I take the issues that Mr Greer puts to me, and also the seriousness with which I embark on my office as First Minister to make sure that the government I lead, the participants of all of my colleagues in that government, are undertaken in a fashion that ensures that everybody in Scotland feels that their government is with them, is protecting them, is assuring them, is making them feel safe, and will always be on their side. And that's what I offer the people of Scotland when I say I will be the First Minister for everybody in our country.
So Olaf, in regards, specifically to the comments made by Ross Greer, do you think it was right for John Sweeney to put Kate Forbes in the cabinet like he has, especially in such a high-ranking position?
Yes, I think I do. But look, let me preface this with the fact that the party's been through a very difficult period. I mean, the past 14 months for the SNP have not been a walk in the park. There's been factionalism, there's been disunity. And I think what John Sweeney tried to do with his leadership is bring all the different parts of the party together and unite for independence. And, if you want to unite for independence, you have to bring people into the tent who you might disagree with or have different views from. I think it's really important to acknowledge that John Sweeney meant everything he said there. He's going to be the First Minister for all of Scotland. He embraces and understands the diversity. He wants Scotland to be proudly a modern, diverse country, and so do I. I mean, I'm proudly socially progressive. I believe in trans rights. I believe in the right to abortion. I am proud that Scotland has legalised gay marriage, and I want Scotland to be more progressive, not less. But it's also important to understand that the Greens and a lot of the people that are expressing huge alarm about Kate Forbes, they served in government when Kate Forbes was Finance Secretary. When Kate Forbes was in Nicola Sturgeon's government, they entered the Butte House Agreement knowing that she has a lot of the socially conservative views that they're now concerned about. I think we have to be careful as to not to stir up the fear and hatred among people who are LGBTQ, and not to stir up hysteria just because someone has deeply held, religious views which come with social conservatism. I think Kate Forbes has made it very clear that she's not going to legislate on these matters. Her religion and her politics will be and must be separated. And, at the end of the day, if she was to try to remove people's hard-won rights and legislate on some of this stuff, then she should be sacked from cabinet. It's as simple as that. I think it is so important, however, just to keep the tone of the debate civil. There is so much dismissal, and there's so much kind of snarky debate on social media at the moment, dismissing the concerns of LGBT people. I think these concerns are valid. I think it's important to listen. John Sweeney's government is all about listening, and it's all about having that open dialogue. And I think if people have those concerns, whether we agree with them or not, whether we are LGBT or we're not, we have to make those views heard, and we have to make sure that everyone feels safe.
Well, I guess just more broadly, how progressive a party do you think the SNP is now in its current rendition? Especially, given that Kate Forbes, is now the Deputy First Minister, and, given her quite socially conservative views, social views, but also, I guess, economically fairly conservative views as well.
No, but I mean, look, the SNP is a centre-left, moderate, big tent party. It includes people of all different views, And we're united in our pursuit of tackling poverty, of economic growth, and of securing independence. And of course, there are people in the party whose views I don't share. I do not share Kate Forbes' views. I think her social views are very regressive. I think, in fact, they're not really in line with the majority of what people in Scotland think. But she's also a very talented individual. She knows her stuff about the economy. 48% of the SNP members have voted for her in the last leadership election. And I think in that spirit of unity, in that spirit of diversity, in the spirit of uniting the party in a common pursuit of independence, it's really important to have her. I think the SNP is not sliding to the right. I think the SNP is not a right-wing party, as some people try to paint it as. It's a centre-left, moderate party in the mainstream of the Scottish society, representing all sorts of different views held in Scotland, but under a moderate centre-left umbrella. That is what the meaning of the Scottish National Party is, a party for all of Scotland. And I think, it is important for John Swinney and for his government to keep pressing the fact that they're not doing away with the progressive policy agenda we've been pursuing, that they're not doing away with the hard-won rights of LGBT people, that we will not be going back to the medieval ages. Of course we're not going to be. But I think the demonisation of Kate Forbes and the sort of collective hysteria by some parts of the commentariat is slightly exaggerated.
So just more broadly on the entire cabinet reshuffle, what do you make of all the new appointments, and what do you make of the fact that the independence ministry has been abolished?
Well, look, every single minister of the SNP government is a minister for independence, right? I mean, this is a pro-independence Scottish government, and our pursuit, as John Swinney has said in his very opening speeches, uniting for independence, right? It should be every single minister's focus to demonstrate good governance, to show that we can transform people's lives through good policy, and fundamentally show that Scotland can do so much better. Just imagine if we had the powers of an independent country like Denmark, like Ireland, like Norway, we could be doing so much better to achieve our key missions, like tackling poverty, like growing the economy in a fair way, like tackling the climate crisis. I think, whether there is a minister for independence or not is actually a bit of a distraction. It's very, very clear that John Swinney has said that independence papers will be published, more of them. Of course, there was over 10 of them published already, spelling out very clearly all the key issues ranging from joining the EU to citizens' rights to defence and so on and so forth. And I think, it is so imperative that we focus on independence. We cannot lose that focus. But we also must understand that independence is not going to be achieved overnight. We don't quite have 50% of support for yes. I wish we did. I wish we had 60% and we could have a referendum tomorrow. But the fact is that the only way we're going to get independence is to quietly and gently persuade people that are not quite there yet, to talk to them, to reach out with open arms, to show that when they go low, we go high, and to show that we have a real optimistic and positive vision for a better Scotland. And I'm sure that independence is going to come. I'm sure that independence will come within years rather than decades. And we just have to keep going.
And what just keeping on independence, I guess. Do you think John Swinney's approach is going to differ at all from previous, leaders' approach to try and achieve independence? Because I guess the SNP have been in power for quite a long time at this point, and since 2014, they've struggled to get a referendum.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, look, we have been in power for 17 years, but look what we've achieved. I mean, we've achieved the Scottish Child Payment, we've achieved the free bus travel, the most house building anywhere in the UK, a brand new social security system that delivers 13 benefits, 7 of which are new and unique to Scotland. So I think we've done a huge amount, and there's a lot to be proud of. But it's also not the time to be complacent. And John Swinney very clearly made this point that the SNP government needs to have a refresh. We need to have a fresh leadership. We need to have a fresh approach. And that fresh approach has to mean imperative that we listen to people that disagree with us. I think too often, and I've been guilty of that as well on social media or in my activism, where people that I disagree with, people that are very pro-unionist or support the Conservatives or Labour, are just being dismissed. I'm not listening to them. I think what we need to do is reach out with a genuine hand of friendship and a genuine sense that we are all Scotland, right? This is the country for all of us. We all care deeply about Scotland's success. We all have incredible ambition for Scotland. And whether you support yes or no, it doesn't matter because we have things in common. And it's about starting with that common ground and building that sense of shared purpose. And hopefully through this outreach, through this listening that John Swinney has demonstrated he wants to engage in, we're going to build a solid majority for independence. But it's not going to be quick. We have to be patient. We have to understand that a lot of hard work is going to happen between now and Independence Day. And, we also have to keep on pressing that if the SNP wins a mandate for an independence referendum, if the SNP wins a mandate for independence at the next election, as I hope it will, Westminster can't just keep denying that right. It is the fundamental right to self-determination that's enshrined in international law. And if Westminster wants to keep denying that, then they're denying democracy. And we have to keep pressing that.
So on to our next story. The Bank of England keeps interest rates at 5.25%. The Bank of England has kept borrowing costs on hold at 5.25% for the 6th time in a row. Alongside the decision to keep rates on hold, the bank said inflation was already on course to hit its target of 2% and would fall to just 1.6% in 2 years, opening the door to future cuts in the interest rate. Giving a more upbeat assessment of the economic outlook, a more upbeat assessment of the economic outlook than in its February report, the bank also suggested the UK recession had ended, predicting the economy had grown 0.4% in the first 3 months of the year. The Office for National Statistics will publish the official estimate of growth on Friday. The 9 members of the bank's rate-setting monetary policy committee were split on the decision to hold interest rates, with 2 members voting for an immediate cut to 5%. Commenting, SNP economy spokesperson Drew Hendry MP said, quote, "The Tories wrecked the economy and they are failing Scottish families, with households forced to pay thousands of pounds extra in mortgage bills and rents as a result of stubborn sky-high interest rates." Quote, "The SNP has repeatedly called for the UK government to help families with the soaring cost of living by introducing mortgage interest tax relief, a £400 energy bill rebate and capping food prices, but Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer have rejected these calls and abandoned families." Quote, "The Scottish Government will continue to do everything within its limited power to help freezing council tax, increasing the Scottish Child's Payment, protecting free university tuition and free prescriptions. It's time Westminster stepped up and did its bit too." So, Olaf, do you think that the interest rates should be cut at this point?
I think interest rates are probably going to be cut. This is, clearly a temporary sort of measure to reduce inflation even further. It's very, very clear that the UK government wants to reach the 2% target before the inflation rates are cut further. I mean, they should be cut to improve investment, to attract more people and businesses to actually, grow the economy through this. I think also, let's not forget, the high interest rates mean hugely increased mortgage payments, and obviously this all started under Liz Truss when she crashed the economy. So I think interest rates should be lowered. But look, the broader point is this: the UK has become a sick man of Europe, and that's been particularly the case since Brexit, since 2016. You might remember that David Davis was talking about in October 2016. There will be no downsides to Brexit, only a considerable upside. Of course, the opposite is true. I suppose the only upside of Brexit is that it's now clear that the Brussels bashing and the kind of myth of the Brussels bogeyman is completely false. It's actually the Westminster mismanagement of the economy that's the problem. And look, think about this. The UK has rising poverty, rising inequality, rising levels of poor health. The housing crisis is spiraling out of control, and UK homes are colder and more damp than most European counterparts. This is supposedly the 5th wealthiest country in the world. And yet look at the levels of poverty, look at the food banks, look at the destitution faced by many of our communities, not least like my community in Fife. And I think politicians, especially at Westminster, need to grow up about the economy. And they have to talk about not just the metrics, not just GDP, not just obsess about statistics, but actually think about people. Think about the impact on families, think about the impact on child poverty, which has been since skyrocketing because of 14 years of Tory austerity and then the changes to universal credit, and of course the callous two-child cap, which Labour coincidentally supports. And contrast that with the Scottish Government's approach, which has introduced 13 benefits through Social Security Scotland, which has free tuition and free prescriptions, which has built more social homes than anywhere else in the UK. It's a different approach that puts people first, and I think we need more of that. And frankly, whether interest rates are cut or not, the fundamental problem is, can Scotland afford to be tied to this failing, broken Brexit Britain? And I think that it can. So, yeah.
No, I mean, yeah, no, I definitely agree that's a bigger issue. Like, rather than just interest rates, yeah, the more systemic issues with the economy, for sure.
For sure.
But to move on to another story, which is also an economic story, think tank warns tax rises will be necessary after election unless fiscal rules are ripped up. The National Institute for Economic and Social Research called for a radical overhaul of the self-imposed constraints imposed on the UK government borrowing and debt, as it warned that persistently weak growth and lower inflation would make hitting the rules more difficult. The organisation said that the next government will be forced to hit voters with post-election tax rises and delay net zero investments unless it is prepared to rip up the current Treasury rules for managing the state finances. In its quarterly health check, the organisation said the economy had emerged from recession, but the not fit for purpose fiscal rules meant there was no scope for Jeremy Hunt to offer fresh tax cuts before polling day. After the general election, the organisation said a future chancellor would be faced with a choice: raise taxes to maintain the existing provision of public services, or rewrite the rules so that they served the UK's medium and long-term needs and objectives, including raising the growth rate, levelling up regions, and greening the economy. Official growth figures are due out on Friday, and the organisation said its expected output to have risen by 0.4% in the first 3 months of 2024. For 2024 as a whole, it is penciling in growth of 0.8%, down slightly from the 0.9% it predicted 3 months ago. Although it believes that the annual inflation rate will fall below the government's 2% target over the next few months, the think tank said the Bank of England would delay cutting interest rates until August this year, and would only reduce borrowing costs once more in 2024. The bank held rates at 5.25% when it met today. So, Olaf, what do you make of the UK government's rules around borrowing in general, their financial rules, and do you think they should be relaxed? Do you think it's like just limiting growth in the country?
Oh, of course they should be relaxed. I mean, look, this is imprisoning yourself with rules that many other countries don't respect. I mean, governments can borrow. Governments should borrow. That's what governments do, right? And the way to stimulate the economy is to pump more money into strategic investments where the economy has strengths, right? For example, in Scotland, it's the green economy. In Scotland, we should be investing huge amounts in things like carbon capture and storage, in things like floating offshore wind farms, in things like tidal, but also in things like satellite manufacturing, which Scotland actually leads on, building more satellites than anywhere else apart from California, I think. So, the fact that both Tories and Labour have this cozy consensus about, no, we're not going to spend more money just because we are so tied to ideology, and yet at the same time bemoaning social democratic ideology for being, idealist and ideological, is frankly kind of ridiculous. I mean, I think there's this realization, which is widespread now, whether you look at Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, or whether you look at what the German government is doing with this huge injection of money into the manufacturing sector, that if you want to grow the economy, and that's the priority for Tories and Labour, that's what we should be pursuing, because in the end, a bigger economy needs more money for public services. You have to invest that money into strategic sectors. So it's actually a massive missed opportunity that they're not doing that. And of course, you also have public services, right? I mean, public services are on their knees. You have 14 years of Tory austerity, which are decimating families, which are pushing people into poverty. You have libraries closing. You have colleges cutting classes. You have, transport being overcrowded and outdated. And I think, come on, just get real. It's 2024. I mean, they have to start investing in the economy if they actually are serious about growing it. Simple as that.
Yeah, it seems quite contrary to common sense. Surely you invest in anything to improve whatever it may be, a business or an economy. But the UK main parties do seem to have like the opposite view, which
It's just
strange.
this. It's just this like ideological stranglehold where they want to, be like serious adults in the room, just by sticking to their self-made, self-imposed fiscal rules without looking at the reality of basic Keynesian economics or Bidenomics, whatever you want to call it. If you want to grow the economy, you have to invest.
So on to our next story. The UN warns the world is on the edge of a climate abyss. In response to a survey conducted by The Guardian, the UN has warned that the world is on the verge of a climate abyss. The survey found that hundreds of the world's foremost climate experts expect global heating to soar past the international target of 1.5 degrees Celsius. A series of leading climate figures have reacted to the findings, saying the deep despair voiced by scientists must be a renewed wake-up call for urgent and radical action to stop burning fossil fuels and save millions of lives and livelihoods. Some said the 1.5 degree target was hanging by a thread, but it was not yet inevitable that it would be passed. If an extraordinary change in the pace of climate action could be achieved. The survey included the views of almost 400 senior authors of reports by the authoritative Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Almost 80% expected a rise of at least 2.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, a catastrophic level of heating, while only 6% said it would stay within the 1.5 degree limit. Many expressed their personal anguish at the lack of climate action. Quote, the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees is hanging by a thread, said the official spokesperson for Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General. Quote, the battle to keep 1.5 degrees alive will be won or lost in the 2020s, under the watch of political and industry leaders today. They need to realize we are on the verge of the abyss. The science is clear, and so are the world's scientists. The stakes for all humanity could not be higher. Cristina Figueres, the UN climate chief who oversaw the landmark 2015 Paris climate deal, where the 1.5 degree Celsius global was adopted, said, quote, these climate scientists are doing their job. They are telling us where we are, but now it's up to the rest of us to decide what this moment requires of us and to turn the seemingly impossible into the new normal. So Olaf, do you think governments around the world are serious about decarbonizing, or do you think they're more concerned about just making targets and claiming they'll
No,
do this by 2050?
They're not serious at all. I mean, look, they're obsessed with targets. They're obsessed with self-congratulating, and they're obsessed with short-term political wins just to get re-elected. It is crunch time right now. It genuinely matters so much. Our house is on fire, and I think the UN has been warning again and again and again and again. We've had every single COP conference warning us about the catastrophic effects of climate change global temperatures rise above 2 degrees. I think there was a survey of scientists from the IPCC, the other week, and 75% of them predicted that the global temperatures will increase above 2.5 degrees. Only 10% predicted that it's going to stick to 1.5, which is the goal of the Paris Agreement. So I think there is a huge amount of concern from the scientific community. And if you're a climate scientist, you must be banging your head against the wall because you keep saying the same thing and politicians just don't listen. It's like the scene from Don't Look Up. I think we have to fundamentally rejig our economy and invest in things that will produce economic growth in a fair way that leaves no worker behind, but that change the way that we power our consumption. I mean, look, again, I keep making the point about green energy in Scotland. We're lucky that Scotland is a very windy place and that we also have a lot of coastlines. We can generate hydro electricity and wind. We should be investing in that and exporting it all around the world to make sure that we help other countries decarbonize faster as well. We should be investing massively in solar. And look, by the way, it's great news that solar is becoming cheaper and cheaper to produce and is becoming more and more widespread. China is definitely leading on this big time. But we do have to do away with fossil fuels. We also have to end this culture of endless consumption for consumption's sake. I mean, if you look at if you look at companies like Shein or like Temu, which are flooding the world with plastic trash that we just don't need, and selling it dirt cheap. If you can buy a portable charger for £1.50, that somebody was screwed up in the process. There is such a huge amount of pressure right now on politicians to get it right. They only have a couple of years left. We saw the COP in Dubai last year, which turned out to be a bit of a farce, which was run by an oil executive and was full of greenwashing. I think there were more oil executives there than climate activists. We have to change that approach. Politicians have to get real. And, how do we do that? How do we make them listen? I guess keep protesting, keep writing letters to politicians, but also keep making the rational arguments, the pragmatic arguments that, if we invest in the green economy, if we properly invest in greener transport and in green energy, we're actually going to grow the economy, because that's where the profits lie. That's where the future of the economy is.
And just quickly before we move on, what do you think of the Scottish government's response? Do you think that's been adequate to climate change? Especially in light of the target which they made and then scrapped, which led to the View House agreement falling apart.
Yeah. Well, look, it's regrettable that the target was scrapped. I didn't want it to be scrapped, but the fact is, firstly, the Scottish government doesn't have powers to borrow money and to control its own economy. It's tied to Westminster. So inevitably, when Westminster makes cuts and certain decisions, the Scottish government is impacted by it. And it was always very, very difficult to meet that target anyway. It's worth remembering, by the way, that it was opposition parties that pushed the Scottish government to move that interim target from, I think, 60% to 70% decarbonisation by 2030. That was always very difficult to achieve. I think Scotland has a lot to be proud of. I mean, if you think about it, we've decarbonised faster than most other countries in Europe. Scotland generates almost 100% of its electricity from renewables. We have a huge amount of potential still to harness. And, we're being hampered by damaging Westminster policies at the same time. So Scotland has the energy. We just need the power. And we have to keep our ambitions high, but we also have to be realistic. And hopefully we'll reach net zero by 2045. It looks like we're on track.
Well, on to our next story. Malta's former Prime Minister charged with corruption. Malta's former Prime Minister, Joseph Muscat, had been charged with corruption in a hospital privatisation scandal that was once investigated by the murdered investigative journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia. Daphne Caruana Galizia. Muscat has been charged with accepting bribes, corruption in public office, and money laundering, according to documents seen by AFP. He has described the allegations as, quote, fantasies and lies, and said he was the victim of a political vendetta. Chris Farina, Malta's deputy prime minister, who is tipped to become Malta's next European commissioner, and the country's former finance minister, Edward Siskuluna, who is now the governor of Malta's central bank, were charged with fraud, misappropriation, and fraudulent gain. Farina, who was health minister at the time of the privatization deal under investigation, said he had, quote, absolutely no doubt that the court will find nothing other than my complete innocence. Siskuluna has not commented on the accusations, but has previously denied any wrongdoing. Muscat's former chief of staff, Keith Schembri, and Conrad Mizzi, a former minister, face charges including money laundering, soliciting bribes, and corruption. Both men have denied the accusations. The charges are part of a long-running investigation into a decision by Muscat's then Labour government in 2015 to pass the management of free public hospitals to a private company, Vital Global Healthcare, in a deal conservatively estimated at €4 billion. Daphne, a crusading investigative journalist, had written about the deal before her assassination in a car bombing in 2014. In February 2024, a court annulled the privatization deal between the Maltese government and Vital's Global Healthcare. Later, Steward Healthcare finding evidence of fraudulent behavior. Responding to that decision, the Daphne Foundation said the judgment vindicated her, quote, extensive reporting about the fraudulent deal. Daphne, who reported widely on corruption across the political spectrum on the Mediterranean island, was killed outside her home in October 2017, sending shockwaves across Europe. An independent inquiry in 2019 found no evidence of government involvement in the assassination, but said the state had to bear responsibility for creating, quote, a culture of impunity. So, Olaf, just to quickly ask, what do you make of these charges, and do you think they could be symptomatic of wider corruption, of politicians around Europe?
Yeah, I mean, it's awful, isn't it? Like, I don't know much about the Malta scandal, by the way. I'm learning a lot of it from your great reporting on this. But I think we obviously had Qatargate in Europe. We've also had a lot of corruption scandals linked to China, and we've had a lot of money laundering scandals in the Conservative Party, of course, where they gave dodgy COVID contracts to their cronies. So I think there is a problem with corruption in politics. I think we need a lot more transparency. The one upside of social media, I guess, is that it's easier for citizen journalists and investigative journalists to really bring these things to the fore and to break through the kind of harassment and barriers that are created by the powerful to stop these things from emerging. But, with the murder of Daphne Caruana Galizia, you see just what, brave reporting can lead to. It's absolutely horrible and unimaginable what Daphne, was subjected to, what her family must be going through just now. To be a journalist and to report on politicians' corruption is an extremely brave thing to do, and we have to commend it. And it's also interesting, isn't it, looking at the Maltese Prime Minister's conduct, because it really looks like a pretty gross assault on, judicial independence, the rule of law. We've seen way too many politicians in Europe attacking the rule of law, just to protect their own short-term interests. So it is concerning. It's concerning, and I think it's a good time to talk about more transparency in politics.
So on to our next story. Elite cyclist seeking UK asylum told he must move to Bibi Stockholm barge. A gold medal winning elite cyclist who is seeking asylum in the United Kingdom fears his career will be derailed because he has been told by the Home Office he must move to the Bibi Stockholm barge and cannot take his bike on board. Mohammed Ganjakhanoglu, 26, an Iranian, has won 4 gold, 2 silver, and 6 bronze medals in big competitions and has completed in his World Championships. According to Michael Gray, the road race secretary at Reading Cycling Club, where Ganjakul is a member, he is the best racer in the history of under-23 cycling in Asia. Ganjakul, sorry for pronunciation, said since the Home Office placed him in a hotel in Reading 8 months ago, he had been given new hope for his career, thanks to the support network that he built in the area. Home Office officials have told reporters that while Ganjanlu would not be allowed to take his bike on board or ride it to the port area, would be allowed to store it in a lockup at the port and ride it elsewhere. Gary said that if he is moved to Portland, he will suffer with not being able to race. His talent and positive mental attitude will be slammed back down to zero. Ganjanolu said if he can lock his bike up somewhere in Portland, it would allow him to train on his own, but he would not have the chance to rebuild his career under the banner of Reading Cycling Club and race alongside his friends. Ganjankulu began cycling at the age of 10. On to our next story. MSP raises awareness of domestic abuse. Okay, so Olaf, just your comment on that story. What do you think of the UK's migration system in general, and how would one of independent Scotland differ? Just given you're part of the SNP.
Where to start? It's just the performative cruelty of Westminster government is absolutely staggering. Of course, we've seen the Rwanda scheme, which is the only saving grace of the Tory government right now. This is the only thing that they're banking on to salvage some of the losses. It's not working. Just today there was a YouGov poll showing that Tories might have 16 seats by the next election. But look, back to migration. I think it is absolutely shameful that the two main parties agree on the idea that cruelty to migrants is a good thing. They just disagree on the ways and the means of doing it. The Labour Party's approach to migration is horrific. I think, Keir Starmer really has to have a long, hard look at himself. Just look at Natalie Elphicke, who was admitted into the Labour Party, a person with hard right and xenophobic views, who has suggested that Marcus Rashford missed a penalty because he was thinking about free school meals too much, who has slammed migrants and called on small boats to be pushed back and drowned. It is symptomatic of a rot within Westminster politics, which dehumanizes migrants, which doesn't see the human in them and the fundamental value of their existence. And it's also a problem in Europe as well. I mean, if you look at the Fortress Europe approach and the methods employed by Frontex, it isn't much better. Scotland, I like to think it's a fundamentally different country with a different politics. It's much more welcoming. It's much more open-armed and open-minded, much more inclusive. I mean, I'm a first-generation migrant. I was born in Poland and I came to Scotland thanks to the EU in 2004. And, I was welcomed with open arms, and I'm Scottish now. I consider myself a Scot. So I think Scotland needs to have its own migration system. I think Scotland needs to have a separate visa system before we're independent. And hopefully after independence, we can build a fundamentally different approach, one that, treats humans as humans and not as cargo to be shipped onto barges.
So on to our last story. MSP raises awareness of domestic abuse within the LGBTQ+ community. In a members' debate in Holyrood today, Colette Stevenson, MSP, condemned domestic abuse in all forms as she highlighted that of the Police Scotland statistics reported in 2021 to 2022. 1,691 domestic abuse incidents were recorded with same-sex victims and suspected perpetrators. The MSP for East Kilbride spoke about the need for a comprehensive analysis to identify gaps in domestic abuse service provisions for LGBTQ+ people. Commenting debate, Colin Stevenson, MSP, said, quote, "I will welcome the chance to bring this important debate forward in the Scottish Parliament and to use this opportunity to condemn all forms of domestic abuse. Research suggests that 30% to 45% of LGBTQ+ people will experience intimate partner violence, IPV, and we know that LGBTQ+ people can face additional barriers when accessing supportive services and receiving support." Quote, "As we mark LGBTQ+ History Month, it is important that we raise awareness of LGBTQ+ victims of IPV, the scale of which is likely to be far greater than the reported figures available to us. These statistics serve as a stark reminder of an unacceptable level of domestic abuse still prevalent within our Scottish society." So, Olaf, do you think it's important for people in power to be raising awareness, of issues like this, which are clearly quite important to a lot of people in Scotland?
I would say it's a no-brainer. Of course it's important. And, domestic abuse scars our society to such a great extent. And I think it's so important for politicians to speak up about it, to not, not be complacent about this. Of course, we have made a lot of progress. I think we've destigmatized a lot of it, but it's really important to keep raising the alarm and to keep supporting people that face domestic abuse. It is absolutely horrible. So hats off to Colette Stevenson.
Well, that is all I've got time for this evening, but before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programmes will always be free to view, however, if you can afford just £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our focus must now move to securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base and regular funding. So thank you to our guest, Olaf. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Goodbye, and thank you for watching.